Uh, in the India way, you have stated that part of India's foreign policy strategy would involve cultivating Europe. Could you shed some light on what that phrase means and how exactly does EU fit into India's vision and strategy today?
First lesson, when you write a book, be prepared for people to throw it back at you. I learned something in the process. But look, seriously, the reason I mentioned that was for a long time, Indian diplomacy was focused on the larger European national states. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with them. I mean, most of them have been good, time-tested partners of ours. I think the fact that Europe had evolved so much was not necessarily reflected in our way of working. And I say that as self-criticism. I mean, I'm equally to blame for this. So one of the first things I did when I became foreign minister was actually to visit Brussels. And I've tried to make it a point to actually make sure that we engage all the 27 EU members, which is why I'm particularly happy to be in Slovenia today. Because we do realize Europe is a collective enterprise, and you need in a collective enterprise to kind of have all the stakeholders with you as part of as much as possible. Now, why should we cultivate Europe collectively? In a way, the answer was given by my Portuguese colleague, which is there are a lot of things in the world which are not necessarily Western in the way in which people tend to see it or people tend to portray it. I think today when you speak about a liberal order, when we speak about trust and transparency, I think these are issues which at one time may have been more central to a Western discourse, but are today increasingly shared beyond the Western world. And I do see a lot of issues where India and Europe have meeting points, and it's important to come to Europe, engage your European counterparts, discuss it with them. And one of them is actually where does Europe stand vis-a-vis Asia and the Indo-Pacific? Because I would argue that especially after 2008, for reasons which we all know, Europe has been much more reticent about articulating its interests and backing that up beyond its immediate confines. And in a globalized world, that is not even in Europe's own interest. So Europe needs to know that it has friends in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, that a lot of principles and values and outlook that Europe has, a lot of other countries share it. I think that binary, Western, non-Western is a false binary. I think it's a very self-serving binary. And I think by strengthening India-EU relations, we refute it very convincingly.
You have also spoken in the past of the few sectors where there is imminent opportunity for both sides. You mentioned climate change as being, or climate response as being one of them, digitalization as being another one. How do you reconcile the differences within the EU in terms of the way they want to move their technology decisions? There is the overbearing presence of a large actor who is not necessarily trustworthy or transparent in many of the activities. How does India reconcile this digital bridge with the EU when EU itself seems to have big differences within in terms of the choices they make in the technology regimes?
Look, I mean, it's not India's responsibility or India's capability to solve EU's problems. That's for EU to solve. I mean, it is natural if there are 27 countries in a collective, you will have a spectrum of views and interests. So there will be a European debate, like there will be an African debate, or like there will be a South Asian debate, or there will be an Indo-Pacific debate. I think what is important for us is whether the net result of that is an outcome with which India is comfortable as a basis of a partnership. And today, if you look, I don't want to say a post-COVID world because we are still very much in a COVID world. What has the COVID world done? COVID world has raised fundamental issues whether the current globalization model is the right model. The word strategic autonomy, which used to be heard politically in India decades ago, is today heard in Europe, economically. Okay? Today, issues of trust and transparency, reliable and resilient supply chains. I mean, these are the terms which the COVID world has spawned. And I think it's important in a world where all of us have expanded our perception of national security to cover something more than, a kind of a military, political, physical, intelligence security, to a larger sense of well-being, vulnerability. In this world, I think societies who are, in a sense, democratic, who are market-based, who are open, who may have their own debates, and we may not always agree. I do think that there is a kind of a new basis for conversations which are coming out in a COVID world. I mean, today you are pointing at India and EU, but I think it applies equally to India and Africa, and presumably to Europe and Africa as well.
Dr. Jaishankar, you alluded to Fortress Europe after 2008, where in many ways, while they embraced economic globalization, they were reticent to engage politically with the world. Do you sense a shift? You see lots of boats floating from Europe to the Indo-Pacific. You see UK send its fleet. You see Germany make a trip. You see other announcements. The French, of course, are active and ambitious in that region. Do you think this is a new political moment for EU, or is it too early to reach that conclusion?
Well, I mean, there are certainly, as you said, a lot of boats moving, but I think I wouldn't reduce the debate to that, and I am not disrespecting your remark. I would certainly sense that there is a sharper awareness in Europe today that what happens in Indo-Pacific, what happens in Asia, what happens in Africa, what happens in the Middle East, impinges directly on the interests of Europe. I think that realization is sharper in 2021, let us say, than 2014. And because of that, I think there's a much greater interest in Europe to deal with other regions, especially a region like the Indo-Pacific. And some of that interest, for example, we saw reflected in the EU 27 summit with India on May 8th. My own sense is this is good for the world because, if you look at the evolution of the world order since 1945, there's been new centers of production, there's new centers of consumption. If you look at the top 20, 30 economies, the inter-se list has changed. I think the big development, which in my view all of us have a collective interest, is actually in the more faster rise of Africa, because only then the world will truly become multipolar, in my view. But I would say if all of us took more interest in each other's lives, I suspect as a collective we would be better off.
And maybe just as a quick question, how do you see the going-ons in Afghanistan impact this project, this common project of creating a rules-based liberal order?
They gave you a very neat answer by saying that they're going to discuss it at 6. I'll discuss it with them after 6.
Fair enough. Minister Logar, let me turn to you. I was able to attend some of the conversations and I heard some of the reportage coming out of this particular forum. What is very clear is that, like within the country I come from, there are internal divergences on some key questions. And you don't hold back like we don't hold back. I think they are quite public differences on investments, difference on also the nature of political regimes. My question to you is that when you have a very vibrant and divergent internal system within the EU, would you be comfortable on creating common positions on some really difficult questions that the Indo-Pacific is posing? For example, the developments in South China Sea, for example, on Taiwan or Hong Kong, for example, in the Himalayas. Do you think that the EU as a political actor, and that's what Dr. Jaishankar was suggesting, EU as a political actor, can it reach that degree of consensus to take a position on some of these difficult questions?
Well, Europe is in a system that is sui generis, and it has its own goods and bad things. So there are 27 member states, and in some area we have, let's say, communitarian system, and some system we are working and performing like independent state. Well, in foreign and security policy there is unanimity required, which means that sometimes it's a bottleneck to adopt a bold decision on regarding, let's say, international relation. And as you know, it's a high representative that it represents a foreign policy of the European Union upon agreement of member states. So the architecture as is it now, I think it's giving, let's say, united statement for broad issue, but those very sensitive issues are more or less left aside for the member state today on their own. And I think it's okay, it's good for that, because otherwise it becomes too uniform approach. However, as long as we are tackling human rights issues, so let's say the ideas of the founding principle of the European Union, as I remember, we always succeeded to have bold decision. We succeeded to adopt new sanctions. We succeeded to adopt other measures that was, on the arsenal of European Union available in a toolbox for, say, force with, in a way, not so soft but not so strong power other interlocutors into the direction we think it's right.
Mr. Silva, can I ask you the same question?
Same question?
The same question. Do you think there is a need today to mobilize a political consensus to be a real actor in some of these it's a tough neighborhood, Indo-Pacific?
Yes, I do think that consensus and its consequence, the unanimity rule, is a factor that can enforce European positions. When we agree, it's 27, we have a legitimacy and we have a capacity that none of us could have if it acted individually. But this is a coin with the two faces, and the other faces of the coin is that we have morally and politically, each of us, the duty to contribute to a consensus. Sometimes Portugal, it is the case of Slovenia and many other member states, we have to have an evolution in our position in order to approach the consensus, in order that the unanimity is possible. And unfortunately, currently 1 or 2 or even 3 member states are not accepting this political responsibility. So we face some cases, fortunately they are quite few, but sometimes in important issues in which we cannot approve a declaration of the European Union as such, because one of the member states is vetoing it. And this is not the idea of founding our external policy and security policy on a consensus, a very strong one, but it has this assumption that everyone can contribute to that consensus. And the veto should be exercised only in issues that could put in question national fundamental interests. So perhaps this is already a debate that we are having internally, and I think this debate will be very important, very tough, but it is very necessary. If not, what we are doing is what we call the enhanced cooperations. It means that groups of member states go into a direction more deeply or more rapidly than the organization as such.
And is that a real danger? Is that a danger that you would see some breakout groups putting together more muscle and weight behind certain issues?
Theoretically and politically, I do think that Europe is a mosaic. Very different countries with different traditions, languages, histories, and even ways of living. And this is a strength of Europe. This is a richness of Europe being this mosaic. But in the next future, we will see what we call the variable geometry. We will see that we shall have a common ground in terms of internal markets, of course, of values, common values and institutions, and in terms of some very general approaches. And we are going to see different formations of states within the European Union. Some of them share the same currency, as it happens in the Eurozone. Some of them have what we call the structured cooperation. It means more improved cooperation in terms of defense and security, and others forming other groups in other fields of cooperation. So I do think that not in this mandate, but somehow and in the next decades to come, Europe will see this evolution in terms of what we call multiple speeds in our European integration.
Minister Lobar, you want to comment?
Yeah, I wanted just to add the fact that, I mean, talking about keeping the unanimity in foreign policy of EU foreign policy, or let's say moving it away in order to be more concrete in a statement on a foreign relations, it's constantly moving around. Ministers and other decision makers and the institutions as well are talking about. European Parliament is regularly talking about. Even we both during our last visit discussed about this, and Augusto had a very good argument in that sense that in order to prevent going to qualified majority in foreign policy, in foreign relations, is and preserve unanimity is not to abuse unanimity for your own political goal. So abusing it is the strongest argument against not keeping the unanimity. And I think this really nicely represents the broad thinking.
Mr. November, the last 2 years have actually shown a torch on the international system. We have looked at issues around vaccine inequity. We have seen countries struggling to access drugs, pharmaceuticals, and health services. More recently, we have seen certain political upheavals in different parts of the world. Sitting in Kenya, how do you assess the performance of the international system in some of these critical questions around development issues, health issues, political and security questions? And are you optimistic about this new, political geography called the Indo-Pacific that is emerging? Do you think that this offers us a chance to reset and restart, or do you think we are going to see some tougher times ahead?
Recent developments, of course, have definitely put a strain on the established regional multilateral systems, and their ability to deliver. And the COVID-19 pandemic has especially brought to the fore some of the challenges that remain very alive in our midst. Take the challenge of unhindered or free access to vaccines, for instance, which has really demonstrated the inequalities that still exist. And sometimes we forget, when faced with an existential threat such as the COVID-19 pandemic, we forget that limitation in any part of the world is actually a risk to the whole world. And therefore, it is a lesson to the world that we need to do more together. And we need to strengthen the systems we have put in place to deliver on some of these promises. Now, do we have faith in the evolving architecture, if I would call that architecture of the Indo-Pacific, to be a platform to provide answers to some of these challenges? I would say certainly yes. I said at the beginning that this is an area of an amazing constellation of diversity in terms of cultures, peoples, countries at different levels of development. Yet there is also a very strong shared history and certain values that, if given prominence, can bring this region together in a very strong way. And certainly, therefore, we see the emerging cooperation around the Indo-Pacific as a good opportunity. And that is why, as Kenya, as Africa, we definitely want to play a prominent role and ensure that we achieve the aims of this agenda. And specifically, there are certain things that we would want to see happen quickly. Some of the measures that we are putting in place in Africa, for instance, I'll mention in this regard the Africa Technology, the Africa Maritime Technology Cooperation Center, which is located in Mombasa, Kenya. It's an important platform for working on the question of maritime security and some of the challenges that I mentioned earlier, ocean pollution. We can build partnership around institutions such as that to deliver solutions that we know that, if solved, can unleash incredible growth in areas like the blue economy, for instance. Kenya has also put in place recently a Coast Guard as part of efforts to strengthen the whole agenda of maritime security, to deal with the challenge of piracy and transnational crime. These are areas of cooperation. And now we are already doing a lot with the European Union. We are already doing a lot with India. And all these present an opportunity, definitely, for us to do more together for the shared prosperity of this whole region and the world.
Dr. Jaishankar, let me come to you as we close this first segment, the 1 hour segment with the ministers. End of the day, any partnership, any arrangement, any coalition is judged by its performance. What do you think are the key deliverables that this partnership, this collective has to produce, has to deliver to countries and regions and communities to be counted? Otherwise, it's just a talk shop and a panel discussion.
Which partnership? India-EU?
India-EU partnership, specifically.
Partnership has definitely economic deliverables. I think it has a connectivity deliverable. Certainly, it has a values and outlook deliverable. It has a political deliverable. I think right now everybody is a little cautious laying out positions on Afghanistan, but I think on issues like that, there will be consultations and there will be sort of positions which people would try to develop, if not in common, at least in some kind of coordinated form. Because at the end of the day, all of us have visions of the world which reflect our values at home. I think those which converge more will tend naturally to gravitate to each other and to work with each other. So I do think, that this relationship will have milestones as it keeps unfolding, which you can say, okay, on this issue, these decisions came out of India-EU confabulations.
So I think that's a good segue to close this particular segment. There are economic deliverables, there are political deliverables, and then there are value deliverables that the India-EU partnership, especially in the Indo-Pacific context, must be appraised through. And let me thank the ministers. Please join me in applauding their interventions this afternoon. And thank all of you for joining us. I can request the ministers to leave the stage and continue with their schedules and programs. And we will move to the next segment where we will be joined by experts and practitioners, Ambassador Keshav, Ms. Chakarova, and Dr. Twining. So, ministers, please.